Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to Mindshack episode 6. My name is Jean-Claude, and I am joined by
Christina. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined by
Lethabo, and I'm also one of your hosts.
Mindshack is a Gen Z podcast that discusses topics ranging through societal issues, psychology, entrepreneurial leadership for Africans and by Africans. We humbly aim to be African leaders in our respective spaces. Now, speaking of spaces, that's actually what our topic is today. I'm going to take a second, though, before I tell you the topic, and remind you, we need you to come to our Instagram page, that is mind_shack_, because your feedback is the fuel to this podcast. So please continue to give us feedback as we set sail on this journey in discovering and establishing Mindshack as a podcast and as an adventure we're going on. So our topic for today, without further ado, is space exploration. This episode is kind of a special episode in some nature because we decided to bring on guests again. I wish I could put a round of applause for that. Oh, thanks, Tina. That really helps. So we brought in guests on this topic that are not astronauts or scientists because that's going to be pretty hard to get. We brought in guests that are particularly interested in the conversation we're going to have today. Guests that have done their research and kind of enjoy speaking about this topic in particular. So I'm going to go ahead and move into introducing our guests. Firstly, I'm going to start with Ryan. Ryan's going to take a little second to just tell you a little bit about himself and why he chose to join us today. Ryan, you can go ahead.
Hi, Ryan Kiruthu. I'm 20 years old. I'm from Kenya. And today I wanted to join because I believe space is where humanity is going next. It's a lot of technology, it's a lot of power, and it's what we need.
Okay, a lot of technology, a lot of power. That's super true. Power is a big thing there. So, next person we have is Wema. Wema, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Wema. I'm 20 years old, and I love space for many reasons. But I think one of the biggest ones is no matter how hard I try, I can't even begin to comprehend just how void it is or vast it is.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a part of what we're going to be talking about today. Seems like you guys are slotting in the right spaces of the conversation. Erica, please, you're the last guest. Please give yourself a little chance to introduce, talk about yourself, and why you've decided to be here today.
So hi everyone, my name is Erica Gathoni Kikunze. I am 21 years old, and I am super excited to be here because this is a topic that is very close to my heart, because I feel as though, as a civilization, we have grown up with certain boundaries known to us and basically lived with it. And we haven't exhausted the possibilities of the universe and the benefits and advantages of it. So I'm super excited to be here.
Okay, thank you very much. That's an important point. So I guess to kind of shift into the conversation, I'm going to go ahead and lay out some stats to some nature. I'm going to speak on the space exploration progress right now, what's happened, who's been to space, the kind of things along power that exist with space exploration. So firstly, I don't know if you guys knew, there's only been 560 people that have gone out to space, that have left the planet and gone out to space. 500 of them have been men, and 60 of them have been women, around 60 plus, something like that. And then a random point, I'm going to just throw it in there. 5% of people that go out to space have died. That's mortality rate, which is kind of sad. But I brought that up particularly because of the women, right? I think we got a nice little blend of men and women over here. But I'm going to give this to one of the ladies first because I think it's an interesting question to go with. What do you think, maybe in some of the knowledge you already know, might be a reason why women haven't necessarily gotten a chance to take up space exploration? Christina, if you don't mind, I'm going to give that to you first.
Let me just say from my viewpoint, I think that's kind of just a reflection of, again, like the patriarchal point that society's at. The fact that, space exploration was considered like a manly industry. And like even when I was watching a movie called Hidden Figures, they were very, very important, Black females that were part of some of these really monumental parts of time and space exploration, and they didn't get that recognition because it was predominantly like supposed to be for men. So I know 60 is little, but I think that's also just a reflection of all like this feminist movement that's been going on, which is lovely. So it's obviously shitty because 500 to 60, but there is some type of change. That's what I think. Erica, what do you think?
So I definitely agree with you, honestly. There's so many male-dominated industries that are so thought to be male-dominated industries. And, if you think about it, even as a reflection, you start to, as a woman, before what used to happen is, if you know that that's a person's place, then you shy away from it, right? But, and then you kind of look for your own niche. So, but now I feel as though it's it's beautiful because there's so many women coming forth and using their skills and not shying away from them. Because back in the day, there were still very many women that were doing science and all these things, but didn't really get the recognition that they deserved because they were women, right? The improvement is there. And I mean, starting from us.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's a place to start. Wema, I'm going to give you an opportunity to just share a little bit of what you think from a man's point of view. So please go ahead.
I obviously agree with Christina's and Erica's points of how it was unfair in the past how women were being treated or being belittled and excluded from very significant moments in history, right? But now we look forward to the future and space exploration, what we're looking forward to now. We've actually come from a really far place because there's this lady I've been following. She's 19 years old. She's called Alyssa Carson. She's from the States. And she's set out to be the very first person to walk on Mars in 2033. Like, it's pretty insane that the very first person to go on Mars is going to be a woman and who is currently 19 and set her life trajectory to go walk on Mars, which is pretty insane.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna claim the woman title and be like, "Yay, let's go, women! We're finally doing things." But I think that's genuinely so dope. So it's 2033. I will definitely put that in my calendar. And maybe 10 years ahead, but whatever.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it kind of leads into something I was thinking as you guys were speaking. So I asked you why women are so few within space exploration. But one question with some of the parts of what you're alluding to in your answer for me is why space exploration is so important to us in the first place. I think NASA as a whole, which would basically be the organization that's leading the way in the space exploration that we know firsthand, excluding Russia, etc., things of that nature, are probably doing a big effort to bring in women in space exploration. But the space exploration race, why did it start and why do we find it so important? I have something to add on that, but I'm going to give Ryan a first opportunity to go at it. I hope, Ryan, you're comfortable with that. If you are, please go ahead.
I think when we look at the idea of why space exploration, we need to remember that space exploration rather, really started to come up during the Cold War, and it was this fight between the US and, was it the Soviet Union or Russia at the time? But them, and I think when we realize that the Earth has a limited amount of resources and space has all these resources that could be available to us if we built our technology up to reach that level. For us, we also need to remember that the rate of our population keeps going up, and there's this idea that if we do colonize the rest of space, we'd have more people in various parts of the world. We'd be harnessing technologies that are created or based from our need to get there, similar to how the reason why like Africa was the mad scramble for Africa started in the first place was because of that need to attain those resources.
I think it was a race to space that initially started things between Russia and America, like you said. But yeah, you also kind of touched on part of the reason I was asking why, well, without saying the question, was why did they start that race? Like, why was it important to America and Russia to just decide to freaking explore outside of the Earth? And a thing that comes to mind, in addition to what you said, is power too. So yeah, the rates, like there are a lot of humans on the planet, and we are also growing in reproduction. So a thought that comes to mind is the next place for us to kind of want to inhabit, and who takes the initiative and how that's done. So initially, between Russia and America, it was satellites. They were trying to get satellites out in a way to observe one another. And that allowed them to gain certain information about each other that gave them more power and or more leverage over each other. So that's what kind of kicked off the space race initially. So when we speak of now where it feels like it's almost out of survival, I do have another question. What's wrong with the Earth? Why is it believed that it's not going to last?
Yeah, speaking about what's wrong with the Earth, and just I'll reference a lot of movies actually, and a lot of people actually. So if you just think about it, I think life on Earth is basically at an increasing rate of being wiped out, and we can see that right now, like even from the coronavirus, for example, and it's and something that I think most of us know here is like Mr. Stephen Hawking was talking about, and he said that there's so many risks of being wiped out by disaster, global warming, nuclear war, genetically engineered viruses, or any other dangers, right? And he was just talking about how we're going to end up being like cats in a cage if we don't spread out. And I think something that I want to add on to what Ryan said was that he said our population is increasing, right? And that means that you should be worried about the ratios kind of to terrain and the weight, kind of weight mass. Do I call it weight mass? I don't know. The weight of people, so tonnage, weight in tons, right? So that means there's a lot of pressure on the Earth's surface, basically. And that's like another big problem. But just basically because, life on Earth is at a huge risk right now. And this year has shown us an example. But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why it's not believed to last.
Well, that's actually a good part, because I was about to mention the end part of what you're saying. Because I think the scientific part is quite good. But if you look at human curiosity and mindset, a lot of the time when you start exploring and you start seeing new things, you'll kind of see the better of them and the worst of what's going on with you. So if you look at how people started exploring, that's why they started colonizing places such in Africa and all of that. Because you'll see stuff there that are much better than what you have. That's why they took stuff from here to take it there. So the same thing could go with space, that we're seeing the benefits of space, and through that we judging our planet and seeing the worst parts of our own planet.
Okay, I think that's quite true. I'm gonna go back a little to something Erica said. We're curious as people about space exploration in general. One thing that just comes to mind is the amount of money that's going into exploring this freaking space we're talking about. Like, there's like $60 billion plus a year that's going into exploring space. I find that quite wild because when you compare it to world hunger, solving world hunger, that's apparently around $40 billion plus dollars will solve world hunger. So like we're throwing in a year a bunch of cash to discover space. It's interesting to me where all that money that's going into it could have gone. So that's part of why I love to dive a little bit into why we're doing this exactly. But yeah, it's an interesting point. It's an interesting point. It's a matter of like survival, finding the next place to live. But within that, there are challenges too, because at the end of the day, some of what's spoken about is the next place to live is a little too far for us to get to the technology that we have. And that's kind of a scary thought. It's like we're first of all, apparently it said if we're gonna try to inhabit Mars, it's gonna take us something like 70 years or something to get to that planet. Who's gonna have the time to be sitting around, or at least are we sending babies? Maybe, who knows? But you're living your life on a ship going to another planet. I guess a question. Oh, Wema, you seem to say it's a year trip. Um, I'll kind of defer. I kind of defer from my question. I'll kind of defer from my question and go with why you're saying it's a year trip. Is it a year trip?
Yeah, so to get to Mars takes a year, a little less than a year actually, to leave here and reach Mars, which is crazy. Because you think about it and you're like, a year, that's not too bad. But then now it's like, it's a whole 365 days. In light years, it would take uh, not even a second, right? Because Mars isn't that far.
Let me add a little something. First of all, I just want to say I did not even know about those statistics, JC. The fact that you said 60 billion for space exploration and 40 billion for food hunger. I think that maybe it's just from a common person's point of view, that is just a bit illogical, because that kind of shows you the priorities of the government, governments or the priorities of the world. And I completely understand that we're trying to figure out what's going on outside, but have we even figured out what's going on right here? There's still parts of the ocean I'm sure people have no idea about. How are we looking for resources there? I just think sometimes humans have this lack mentality where it's like they're always seeing what we don't have or what we can gain from somebody else, when it's like, just first understand what you already have. I think that's just something that I think. I'm not saying space exploration shouldn't be invested in, but I just think that in comparison to something like food hunger, when there's still countries like Yemen, you know what I'm saying? Like, it may be controversial, but let's actually just put priorities into place and remember that the life right now is a little bit more important than projecting life for 400 years. But I think that just shows my thinking and the thinking of, like, let's say, governments which are thinking centuries from now, So I think just to put that into perspective.
Well, what you said is a true point. Erica was teaming from the moment she started talking to say something. Erica, you're on it.
Yeah, when you talked about the money, I was just like, it's crazy. Because I was looking at a page that was talking about how, I think all of you guys know the rovers that was taken to Mars, the Mars Curiosity rover, right? And just to launch it was $200 million, just to launch it, like excluding other amenities. That was just launch. And it's really crazy because, as Tina said, why don't we focus on what we have? And Tina, there are people who have already kind of gotten all those things. And so when you have it, you're like, okay, now I have this, what's next? They're kind of on the next new thing, and it's just like, okay, so we've discovered this is happening. Okay, so what's next? What are we moving to? And it's crazy because it's a matter of power. Because if you think about it, it's power in economies, right? Because look at the economy. Look at why people are going to space. Apart from the we'll talk about the prominent people in like doing space exploration, but look at why people are going to space or launching any satellites. It's because of agriculture, predicting weather patterns, climate change, and it's anything that can bring money, on Earth, aside from other reasons. But yeah, it's crazy in relation to Africa, especially. Crazy.
Yeah, that's a good way to end off, because at the end of the day, we're Africans, right? So like when you think of that, majority of the money definitely is being spent by the Americans, but there are like African initiatives that are being done for space exploration. Yeah, there's money going to places that could be going to other places, but maybe the conversation, when you think of survival, right? Maybe the conversation for us shouldn't be in that light in some way. At the end of the day, it's us as humans trying to push ourselves, I guess, to the parts of survival, to basically some level of immortality. I feel like that's one point that keeps coming to mind when you think of why we're doing this space exploration thing, etc. Things of that kind of science. So I'm going to shift over to Erica. Based on what you shared about Africa, Africa has some initiatives that are going. Africa has a space station in South Africa and a few other space stations across Africa. I won't lie, I can't remember all of them, but I know South Africa has a space station, and the initiatives that are being done, or trying to, at least in an African context. So I was always curious, like, there's so much that's being done in a first world basis, but like, where do we stand as Africa? Like, are we I don't know how many babies in comparison to American babies are being at like getting to like 10 years old and still wanting to be an astronaut. I feel like the numbers just don't compare when you think of South Africa or Africans, in my context of Africa, obviously. So yeah, I was just curious about that. At least, where do you think an impact from us being young people could be in just pushing forth the space exploration movement?
Wow. I think on a continent that's like often associated with more pressing development issues, it's really tempting to dismiss space exploration and say it's a waste of money, right? Because we have hunger, we have we have the, what do you call it, 17 SDGs, right, that the UN is pushing for, that is also mainly being trying to be implemented for the lower, or rather, do I call it the third world countries, right? I've seen that like the AU is pushing a lot for space exploration, and I think honestly it's a good idea, because Africa, like right now, what Africa is doing is it's mostly partnering with international agencies. So that's Russia, China, US, Europe, Japan, and these countries that have at least well-based, basically have well-equipped stations, right? But for Africa right now, we're not really focusing on going to the International Space Station and doing, scientific procedures. Right now, what Africans are focusing on when it comes to space is agriculture, predicting weather patterns, water, climate change. And you talked about South Africa, where South Africa is actually, I think, was the first African nation to actually launch a satellite into space. And they were focused more on internet connectivity for students. So you can see that our priorities are, we're sticking to Earth. Like I don't think we're really thinking about, because when it comes to Africa, we have so many other beliefs. It's like, what's out there, darkness. And it's just like, from where I come from, it'll probably be referred to as, some witchcraft and just things that it doesn't make sense. Why am I trying to take a flight to, a planet that's basically dark, or, it just doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But I will say that hopefully that's where we're going to get to. But right now, our priorities are based on how it's going to benefit us in our structures in the now.
I think the whole thing of space exploration and why it could take more leverage over paying for stuff like hunger and all of that, easier to sell a solution if there's something broken. So if right now the earth is struggling and you can't get food sent to earth, we can say that there's no food on earth. We have to go out there to get food for you. We have to do all of this to get you guys new home. But I mean, you can't sell it to them, to people, if you have homes here, you have food, you have all of that, you won't be able to sell that. So you need to make sure the earth is broken, the earth is in a bad state, so that when you come in and you say, we're going to Mars, or we're going to some other place, then it's easier for people to accept it, because you can say, there we have food, there you have houses, there you have everything you need that earth can't provide for you.
Okay, that's true. Yeah, I think the earth is it's holding us, and we're a lot. And at some point, yeah, part of this exploration thing, there's gonna be real conversations about how we're gonna continue to survive on this earth. It's funny though, just a random thought. People say like the earth. I don't believe the earth is gonna die. I believe we're just gonna make it inhabitable for ourselves. That's all. And let's just say eventually, God forbid, either we get extinct or we leave the planet, the earth is gonna remain the earth. I don't think the earth is gonna be lost. But yeah, it's just a way for us to, yeah, it's just a thought, I guess, that exploration considers a big part the earth that we're living on, the sustainability, and as well as where we might want to end up finding ourselves living. So yeah, there's one thing that kind of comes to mind when we think of exploring, leaving the planet. We're going out into a space where we don't know necessarily what's out there. We're doing what we can with the technology that exists to kind of apparently have contact with life, or it's more like life is having contact with us. I'm kind of trying to lean in towards life outside of the planet now. The conversations that have happened about that, the information that has been shared. If I'm going to go ahead and ask it in a question. If we believe life outside of the earth exists, Ryan?
I think I'll start off with your question, because when you think of extraterrestrial life, it's always a matter of, if life did exist on another planet, governments would lie about it, and we know that for sure. There's some aspect of that, and it feeds into a sort of paranoia of whether we can really trust our governments. And it goes back to like, is our world flat, or was the moon landing fake? And it's always grouped in that aspect. But I know there's this documentary about Bob Lazar, and he used to work in some underground area in the US, in Las Vegas. But personally, I don't think extraterrestrial life exists. But I do think if it did, the government would lie about it. And it's always like, when you think of how when space started coming up, it's something that we explore. We look at life in Mars, the microbial life, or whether other organisms that aren't humanoids per se exist. And because the ingredients for what we consider to be life is methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water. And because we're carbon-based atoms, I guess, carbon-based people, and our whole view on how life is kind of like that. But if we did, because we do send out like probes to look for like radio waves on whether life is coming, or any other information, the first aspect is maybe they're too far away, maybe they're too smart for us, or maybe they're not, maybe they're just ignoring us.
So Ryan, like, do you believe in it or not? Because towards the end, it felt like you kind of understand where they might be coming from with the research they've done. So do you believe in extraterrestrial life or not? Go on the record, brother.
Okay, I'm not actually sure, to be honest.
I mean, that's the
because
conversation. For me, I feel like a lot of the input from people is like, we exist we exist in the world, and then everything that's around the world is apparently said to be continuously growing. The space, that is, continuously grows and expands. We've explored close to nothing of it. Examples are made of like sand on a beach, or apparently like one particle of sand on a beach in the space and size of space. So a lot of people say, do you genuinely believe that we're the only ones out there? And with that in mind, how would you still answer that? Do you feel that it doesn't exist?
I feel the greatest aspect of this question is what the two answers mean, because it could be, if we don't exist, are we the only ones, which has a very profound impact on how you imagine human life to be and how our experience matters. And then the other aspect of what it mean for them, or for extraterrestrial life to come about. And we both of them kind of question the validity of everything we've come to know about humanity as a whole. But I would say, to be safe in my own way of thinking about the world and what I've perceived it so far, it's easier to say I don't believe in extraterrestrial life, simply because if you do actually accept that, then it changes the fundamentals of how we go.
I think personally, I do believe there is extraterrestrial life, because I believe a lot of the times we believe there isn't. You know, it makes us feel special that we're the only ones, and that we're the only ones that are in this whole universe, and we're the only ones that inhabit a planet. But if you look at it, if we're the only ones, why was there belief that there was life on Mars? And if you think about it too, the fact that we are still here and we haven't explored all of Earth, as you've mentioned, but because we haven't explored doesn't mean there isn't. It doesn't mean that outside of Earth and outside of our solar system, there are other life forms.
Lethabo, I agree with you 100%. I'm gonna put it on record that I believe that extraterrestrial life exists, and yeah. But for me, the twist is I don't believe that intelligent life exists outside. So I feel like we are special, and even though it's selfish to think that in such a big, broad universe.
My question was merely just everyone can answer this. Well, what is more scary? Life out, like there being life outside of Earth, or there not being life outside of Earth? Because I think it's so easy for us to just claim that there's no life outside of Earth. But I think, as mentioned before, do you understand what that then means? Like, we haven't even, not even close, we haven't even come close to discovering what is going on in space. You get what I'm saying? Like, space hasn't even fully been discovered yet. And people, I don't know if there are people in this group, but there are people in this group that are claiming that there's no life, and I'm like, maybe there's no life yet, or maybe there's no life on our horizons. Like we haven't yet seen life, but that doesn't mean that there can't be life. I just think
Yeah.
it's not enough evidence to debunk the idea that there's no life out there. I don't think now whether life is exactly like us, that's a whole other conversation to have. But I think because we haven't entered every single planet that there is in this universe, let's just be humble. That's just my perspective. Because I feel like the moment we start thinking that we are the only ones, that prevents the discovery of, like a whole other way, a whole other like life system, I guess. Because like if you tell yourself that there's nothing to be found, you will stop looking. It doesn't make sense that everybody thinks that there's no aliens, and yet there's still so much research going into trying to figure out if there's life. Like clearly, there has to be something there. That's just my opinion.
Okay. I mean, one thing that's part of this conversation for me is the amount of information that we feel like we might not be getting or being withheld from. Yeah, a lot's come out. Bob Lazar's documentary that Ryan mentioned, etc. But it's just interesting if you a person that kind of likes to think on the edge of a conspiracy and like what don't I know, or what's like the motive behind all the things that we hear and learn about. It's like, yeah, it's a little bit like scary, daunting in some way.
Yeah, so I wanted to add on what Tina said. I personally don't know which one is more scary, not finding anything, because people have invested so much into finding something, right? So not finding something is scary economically, right? And finding something will be like, it's also scary because you don't know how these organisms or how these extraterrestrial beings usually operate, right? But I wanted to add something, and I just wanted to say that if we think about it, like we think about the things we watch, like Star Trek, Star Wars. I don't know if you guys have watched this movie called Life, but it's just basically about like a team that was set out at the International Space Station that discovered a living organism, and they called it Calvin. And the organism was found in a soil sample in Mars, right? And it turned out to be hostile and started preying on the crew members to nurture itself. It's a thing that most organisms want to do to survive, right? Basically, what happened was that what they decided to do is that one crew member decided to sacrifice himself and lure himself into like an escape pod so that the creature could come in, and then he would go into deep space, and then the other crew member would come back to Earth, right? But then it happened that the other crew member was actually taken deep into space, and then the creature came down with the other crew member, who was David, right? And it's really crazy because some of these things we watch, we always say, yeah, it's imagination, it's fantasy, but something always has to trigger imagination, right? Something always has to trigger that creativity. And most people say some of these things, yes, they like science, or some of these things, it's because, they're there or they're not there. But I really believe that there's something to it. Like you see how we have this whole CIA stuff in movies, right? Everyone used to think it's a fallacy, and people used to be like, no, it's not possible. Like we don't have, we don't have these things. But if you look into it, it's there. And that's what gets me scared, because I'm always like, this has to come from somewhere. It just can't be, from nowhere. So I don't know, but I feel like if there is extraterrestrial life, we can benefit from it, and at the same time, it can be the end of us.
So, a movie I watched growing up that really got my perspective going on space and extraterrestrial beings was the Dr. Seuss movie Horton. Horton, I don't know if you guys watched it, but I loved that movie. So, it was basically based on this elephant, right, that found a community of, I forgot their names, but little people living on a speck. And those people thought they were all alone, living in their own world. They only knew what they knew. They didn't know that there was another world outside of that, right? So for me, that movie just got me my mind turning. I was like, this is insane. What if we're also a speck in the universe, and there's also something greater and a bigger being outside of that? So I personally thought, with the movie, I started thinking, how big are we in the universe? And we're not even that big at all. So you narrow it down, so come down to the Milky Way galaxy, and you think about how big are we in that. And to put it into perspective, it's like basically we'd be a coin, and the universe, the Milky Way galaxy would be the size of Africa, right? We're very unsuspective. You can't even tell, you can't even see us from space or anything like that. And in the real numbers, it will take you about 100,000 light years to get across from one end to the other for to get across the Milky Way, right? Which is actually crazy, because a light year, it's gonna take about 300,000 kilometers per second. That's how fast light travels. But a light year you can travel over 9.46 trillion kilometers per year. That's how long it takes for you to get across the galaxy, which is insane. And I believe we barely scratch the surface of our own solar system, let alone the universe.
What I'm wondering is that why is it that humans' first instinct is to demonize something we don't understand? Because let's say I feel like, this is just my own opinion, I feel like we fear aliens because we're scared that they might do what we would do to them, or what we are doing to other species that aren't us, And that's why I'm always the idea of finding life, of course that's scary because it's the unknown, but allow that life to dictate what kind of life it is, So thank you guys for listening to this episode. Please do check out our social media. I will repeat, it's at Mindshack, MIND_SHACK_. So you can get any updates for our future episodes or any other information we would love for you guys to know. But other than that, again, thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed this conversation and learned something new, and catch us next week. See ya.
Boom. Cheers.